Michelle, you should see the
I hit
Flannery made
record.
okay, we're hitting record, never mind. But our logo, for those who are excited about our logo, is drawn by my 16-year-old. So,
Oh,
and
I
it's
can't
awesome.
wait to see it.
It's fantastic. Okay, this is our podcast about books. I'm Jeff, and Tom is here, and we have a super special guest this time, Michele Filgate. Michelle, I didn't ask how to say your last name. Did I just say it right?
You
You
nailed it.
did.
Excellent. Okay. Um, okay, I'm gonna do the introduction and make you a little self-conscious. So Michelle's a widely published essayist. If I tried to read all the places where you publish essays, we'd be like here for the next hour and a half. Because it's you're widely is an understatement. You're a short story writer. You've done book reviews and lots of amazing interviews. I read a couple before we came on. They're fantastic. You teach creative writing at the New School, and you've taught at a ton of other places. You founded the Reading series, and you were the editor and inspiration of the book What My Mother and I Don't Talk About. And you have another anthology coming out, What My Father and I Don't Talk About this May. So thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me here.
Yeah. And so this is, I also have to say, otherwise Tom will say it because I miss it. This is our limited series on books, classics of genres that Tom and I had not read before
Hmm.
doing this podcast. And we're talking about Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt, written in 1975, won a whole ton of honors. Weird to think that this was her, I didn't know this. It was her eighth children's book that she wrote, and she wrote 12 more after it. But this was the one that like she's super known for. Okay, so let's kick off. Michelle, what's your let's go big, like big picture to small picture. Uh Children's lit. Do you read a lot of it? What's your like experience with the genre?
So I read a lot of it as a kid and not so much as an adult. Although now that I am a stepmom, I am finding myself wanting to read more kids' books again. And that's why it was such a pleasure to read Tuck Everlasting, because this was my first time reading it too. I had never read
Was
this.
it really?
Yeah, and I'd always wanted to read it. It's one of those books that I just never got to. And I have a sister who's much younger than me, 14 years younger than me, who is obsessed with the movie, which I still have not seen. And because I always read the book before seeing the movie.
Mm.
And so I'm excited to see the movie now that I've read this book. But yeah, so she was shocked that I hadn't read this book either. But we all have holes in what we've read and what we haven't read. But for kids' books, I mean, I read so many of them, obviously, as a kid. Matilda by Roald Dahl being my number one favorite book.
Yeah.
That was the book that really just I felt seen in that book with I mean, I
That's
think
awesome.
Is
every
it
nerdy bookworm kid is going to see themselves in the character of Matilda, right?
yeah? Is it weird that it was Harriet the Spy for me?
Oh, I loved Harriet the Spy too. Those two were probably two of the most definitive books for me, honestly. And then the Babysitter's Club, which is kind of weird that that was such a big series for me. Just because I don't know. I really like I even wrote fan fiction where I
No
imagined
way.
I was one of the babies.
That's
That's awesome.
awesome. Did
That's
you
great.
watch the Netflix series?
I did not, did
It's
you?
really good.
Oh,
It's
okay.
legit. It's legit good. Yeah.
I'm so excited. I need to watch it. And in fact, a few years ago, I was at a publisher's luncheon and Anna Martin was there, and I got to go up to her and say, I honestly
Wow.
think that I became a writer because of you. And that was so cool to be able to meet one of my childhood heroes. So kids' books, I mean, they're great. And honestly, like in reading this book, I was blown away by the prose was just so much more poetic than I was
Yeah,
expecting.
it's beautifully written.
And I'm curious to hear what you guys thought too, but especially of the setting, it was just so rich in the setting and nature writing
Mm.
and kind of slow moving, which I read it in interviews with Natalie Babbitt that sometimes kids would complain about how slow moving the first couple of chapters are, but reading it now as an adult, really enjoyed that aspect.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I read a ton of kids lit. I mean, I have five children, and we
right.
have certain like authors that we just read every kid I read everything through with them. So like Roald Dahl's one of those. We read all the Roald.
Mhm.
Well, do we read all of them? We do read all of them. Some of them are really weird, but we read a lot of them. We don't. I think I leave a couple out. Um, there's one about a kid who's like in an abusive home, and there's really no good ending to it. He's just kind of stuck there. We don't read that one. But we read the other ones. Yeah. But then they kind of graduate as they go through. Like three of my kids have been really into Rick Riordan, like the Percy Jackson stuff. Yeah. So that's it. I don't know if that verges into like middle grade or YA. I'm not sure where that
It's still
line
middle
is.
grade.
It's
Yeah.
still middle grade.
Riordan's middle grade. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was not a fan overall.
Oh,
Did you love it, Michelle, or
well,
like strongly?
I was not a fan of the way the book ended. I like and I had some issues with this giant age gap of a 10-year-old being groomed by a 17-year-old who's
Yeah.
really like going 104-year-old in a 17-year-old's body. But we
That
can
was
get into
weird.
And it was grooming is the right word. I hadn't even thought of that. But yes,
Oh,
and so I haven't watched the movie, but I looked it up and they age Winnie up to like 15 or
yes.
16 so that it's much more of a romance, which is why I think maybe people who have watched the movie really like it as a romance of, young uh beautiful people.
Yep.
It has sold 5 million copies. Which is crazy. It um I felt like it could have been a Ray Bradbury short story
That's
and it
interesting.
would have been a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
wait, okay. Why?
Because
Yeah.
it has the fantastical element, like we read All Summer in a Day, which has a similar sort. It's
Yeah.
like it's a normal world with one weird twist. Um, it's got some dark undertones. And I just felt there wasn't more of a story to it. I felt like it could have been a lot shorter to get to the gist of it. I'm curious why teachers love it and still love it.
Well, is it still being taught? That's my question. Or is it now seen as an outdated thing that
I
isn't?
hope it's outdated.
I don't know. Flannery
I didn't
last
like it
year
either. Sorry.
last year in high school, Flannery they did a separate piece, and I was like, "Are we still reading a separate piece?"
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
which I think because it's semi-local, they're sort of obsessed with it. But it was like,
Hmm.
man, I don't know. I
My
do.
kids didn't read it.
They didn't read it. Okay.
No. They do they still
Uh,
do like Lord of the Flies.
yeah.
They still do like some, I don't know, quote unquote classics that like I did as a kid, but this was not on the list. Like they still do like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in high
Mhm.
school. And I will say I'm in Maryland. I'm just outside of Baltimore, and our school system's super, which I love, super big into like finding diverse cultures to read from, which I think is great. And this one didn't make the cut for my kids. Okay, so there's mixed opinions. We got mixed opinions on the book. Do we want to talk about what we loved about it first, or do we want to talk about what bothered us about it first, and
Well,
then
I don't. I
end
don't
in
want
what we
our
loved?
podcast to be like trashing books. Like that wasn't what we set out to do. One of the things that I thought was interesting that Michelle already keyed in on was the nature prose, the sort of really like deep dive into describing
Mm,
nature and all of these books that we're reading for this series. I keep running into like how much prose there is and how much what in some ways I would think of as extra prose. Like if I were editing, I would be like, do we need this? Do we need this? This is Vonnegut who said if it doesn't, reveal character or move plot forward, get rid of it. But God knows Stephen King has,
yeah.
you know, but but I'm coming to see that each of these authors like has a reason. And so I was looking at like what is she doing here and why, and I sort of felt like I felt like that she was trying to get us to think about humanity within the realm of nature. And obviously, Angus Tuck, who was the only character that I really liked, um, he's like, this is not great, right? Like this would not be good if we lived forever. And there's parts where I got a sense of like The Little House by Virginia Lee Burton. Do you know that kids book? It's about a little house that the city sort of grows up around. Like I picture the fount, I pictured the bubbly fountain in the tree, and like the forest is getting smaller and smaller and smaller
Mm.
until it's gone. Um, and so while she's teaching us about death, it also seemed like she was teaching us about environmentalism a little bit. Um, Otherwise, I don't know why there was quite so much sort of, I don't know, but the prose was good. I mean,
Yeah.
um, so that was a positive thought that I had about
I
the book.
I think that's an interesting take, actually. I didn't really think about it from an environmentalist viewpoint, but I think that's really fascinating. I I had read some interviews with Natalie Babbitt before coming here tonight after reading the book, and one of the things she talked about is how this setting for the book is a real place. Like she used to go with her family to a place in the Adirondacks.
Hmm.
So I think that is honestly one of the main reasons there's just so much description here and so much scene setting is because she's writing about the world from the viewpoint of what she knows so well.
Mm.
And also there is this fairy tale element to this book, right? And so I think that for her, part of the fun of creating this story was really like living in the world that she's creating there. And so for for me, I felt like the setting was just as much of a character as the other characters
Mm.
in the book. And that was what I found interesting. So that's why I felt like the first half of the book really worked for me. And especially the first like three chapters or so, like where there is so much of that rich nature writing. But it does feel like it felt like the beginning of a book rather than a fully
Yeah.
realized book. I don't know if you guys felt that way.
Yeah.
I want to actually flip something to Jeff because we were talking about it before, but like, yes, it's a fantasy novel, but she doesn't lean into it at all. Like, there's no use made of the fact that they live forever, right?
Except for hitting us over the head again and again about the fact that life is a wheel and that
Yeah.
we
Right, but like,
When the man with the yellow suit shows up and he's like yelling at them that like they've wasted this opportunity, I was like, he's so true. He's so right. Like this is like the worst, like you've had 70 years to like learn something. And we find out that like the oldest son is still like an average carpenter. I'm like, you've been a carpenter for 70 years. How are you an average carpenter? Like how do you like have no passion for your craft? You got nothing. You're just like an average carpenter. And they're like, and sometimes he does some blacksmith work on the side. I'm like, really? You've been 70 years to be a
and
blacksmith?
and there's a scene where he talks about like wanting to do something, wanting to contribute, and it's
Yeah.
like
I'm like,
it's
you've got
been 100 years.
you
It
had
made me
so
think of
much time.
it made me
Yeah.
think of Groundhog Day, where he like becomes an expert piano player, and he,
Yeah, yeah,
like
like where are the skills? What is the like this is the fantasy of like living forever. It's like the Twilight thing of like, yeah, I've lived forever and I speak like 15 languages and I've lived all over the world and
right.
I've like got this like high understanding of culture and art and but there's nothing. There's like he's still like swinging around trees like he's 17. I'm like, come on, man. Like why didn't you like go to the Louvre? It was around. Why didn't you like, anyway, that was one of my biggest complaints with the book was I was like, I don't, these people have wasted eternal life. They've, they've like, yeah. But I will say a positive. The dialogue is, she does some things with the dialogue that I was really super impressed by. Like, I think, especially in the like high emotional scenes, like when the guy in the yellow suit shows up, Michelle, we spoil all the books. Don't worry about it. Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah.
when the guy in the yellow suit shows up, and there's like high drama where they're like, he's explaining what he's gonna do, and then they hit him with a shotgun with the butt of the shotgun, they're talking all the way through it. And I think a lot of times mistakes writers make is they like try to do that in prose and you lose all the emotional pop when you like don't have the dialogue in those like huge emotional moments. And even like small screams and stuff like that, she's like writing through. So I really found like moving from like what y'all are talking about where the prose is beautiful in the first half to like when we get to the end and they are having like big emotional bits, she does a great job of like writing through the dialogue in it, which I was really impressed by. Um, yeah, I liked that a lot. But yeah,
That scene is really good because it crescendos, and then suddenly there's violence, which is weird. And I thought it was good that it came from May rather than one of the boys in some way, but it was still weird to me. Like I thought I'm reading and I think, oh, they're gonna have him drink from the fountain so that he understands what it's like, and or something. I thought it was gonna be something a little uh more sort of compassionate and
yeah.
didactic.
Why do you think they
and
went with hitting
and
him instead of shooting him?
Mm.
Because he dies anyway.
he dies anyway. Yeah,
Not wanting to use the gun. I don't
I
know.
don't
maybe.
know. Does it make her less evil if she hit him instead of shot him? I don't
Uh,
know. I was really confused. I was reading it as like, because I got to the end, I was like, oh, he dies? Why did
But
she just
I
shoot him?
think the reason that they have May do that though, or just be the person who is the perpetrator of the violence is I think it's a parallel between the young girl of Winnie and May because there's a lot of description of in the beginning of the book of Winnie kind of being trapped at her house but and so that feels similar to me in some ways to a jail cell, right? That like she's like looking at the toad from the other side, and she's like not really free to roam, even though her family has that land. They own that land, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, I kind of saw it as this parallel of May is ends up being the one who's in prison, and then if
Oh,
we're going to spoil a book,
yeah.
no,
Oh
no,
yeah.
yeah,
walks with her.
yeah. You should have
So
read it before you listened to the podcast. Um, yeah,
so I
and you
think
don't have an
some
excuse. It's super short. It's like you can read it in a night. Yeah,
exactly. But to me, I thought that was maybe the purpose was there was this parallel going on between the two of them, the
I like
two.
that. I didn't catch that, but I
Yeah.
like
I
that a lot.
I think she wanted it to be as tragic as possible, and there's something about May doing it, who was the like kindest and the gentlest.
Right.
If it was the older brother, it wouldn't, because that's who you sort of maybe would have expected to do it.
Right.
Something like that. I don't know. Totally unrelated. Like Curious George predates this book. So am I the only one who had the trouble with the man in
No,
the
I
yellow
had the
suit?
same idea, but I didn't know it
I
predates the
can't
book.
believe I wasn't even thinking of, oh my gosh, that's so
It's like,
funny.
why would you call him the man in the yellow suit?
Oh, I
Like,
read about this in an interview. She did this because she said not enough people wear purple and she needed it for the musicality of the language. She needed a two-syllable color.
Fascinating.
that's amazing that she thought that much about it.
Yeah, I
Jesus
love
Christ.
that. I respect. That's great.
I also, I do feel like she had a strong sense of dialogue. One of the things that Jeff, you always talk about is, making people talk even when there's no one around. And she totally does that with
Mhm.
Winnie in the first half, because otherwise it's just all prose, all prose, all prose, because she's by herself. And she does a great job of not only does Winnie talk to herself, but she sort of switches the third person to sort of be Winnie's voice now and then.
Yeah.
She does the same thing with May. There's that early chapter with May, which I actually quite enjoyed when I wasn't quite sure what was going on. You know what I mean? Where she gets up and Angus is like, "Oh, what could possibly happen to me? Go ahead." And there's
He even knows what she's putting on because he knows
yeah,
the sound of her putting her clothes
right.
on.
But when you read that, you don't realize it's been 80 years. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
I actually quite liked that part. So,
Mhm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have this weird habit um because so when we first started doing the dialogue doctor, I was like, what's the prose to character interaction ratio in like classic books, and so I would just like sit with a highlighter and like highlight the prose versus the character interaction, just so I could see like, hey, how much of each page is taken up. And I found it's like, books we love tend to not go more than 5 to 8 paragraphs of prose before they get a character interacting with something.
Mhm.
And she totally follows that, even with all of the prose. She's like, the interactions are small a lot of times in the first third, but she gets that like character interacting with something every like before she gets too far so that we start like skimming. But yeah, I was again like her dialogue's super solid. Her character voices are great too. Like
Yeah.
May has that very like kind of rambly anxiousness to her voice, where like Angus has that like shorter sentences until he's like being commanding. He's got that like shorter sentences,
Mhm.
more a lot of body language. Um, the voice I didn't like was Jesse. I couldn't quite get
Yeah.
into Jesse's voice, but yeah,
Same. I felt like Jesse was the most underdeveloped character, yet we're supposed to care about him the most, and that was a
yeah,
little weird.
yeah. I was there with.
Oh, once he was like, "You can be immortal too, so that we can be together," I was checked out on Jesse.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. So I'm excited to see the movie because, as you said, the age gap is much more appropriate in the movie, and so it is more of like a romance. But it seems like they must have completely rewritten the story for the movie, right? Like I don't know how closely they follow. Have either of you
I've
seen the
seen
movie?
it. It was a long time ago, and I do remember the reason I went is because my wife and I were huge Gilmore Girl fans, and it's Roy Gilmore's first
Yeah.
like escape from. Her name's not Roy Gilmore, but that's how I know her. Um,
Alexis Bledel, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, but it's her like first movie out of Gilmore Girls, and so we were like, we want to see Rory fall in love with a hot guy. Yeah,
Right. And this
yeah.
was like before the Twilight craze, because
Hmm.
Right.
because I'm just thinking about how this is, obviously like Fountain of Youth. You can't
Yeah.
help but think of vampires also.
Yeah, yeah. I will say another major like problem I had with the plot the whole time is they're so worried about somebody drinking from this spring, but they never do anything to actually stop anybody from drinking.
No,
They don't
they
buy the land,
they
right? Like
covered
that
it
would
up
be
with
like the
pebbles.
easiest. Like buying the
Right.
land, they don't cover it in any way. They don't try to like even hide it. They don't like plant
No.
trees around it. Like it's just in the middle. There's a tree, big tree's got his initial carved in it, and there it is. Just like, yeah. And then the man with the yellow suit is like, yeah, I bought all this land. It's mine. I'm like, of course, that's the first thing you should have done. Anyway, that drove me crazy. I was like,
This
come
is
on,
part of the
Tux.
ridiculousness of the second half where I'm like, what is going
Yeah,
on too with like what happens at the end too with the tree being destroyed and yeah.
I
yeah,
yeah, it's interesting because I was going to say, hey, let's talk about philosophy now because there's some really interesting philosophy, but it's all in the first two thirds, and then
Yep.
the epilogue. And the epilogue was really fascinating to me because it's like that's all the best stuff, and it's like just crammed in the back there. The whole second half, I felt like the stakes actually lowered.
Hmm.
Like once she hits the man in the yellow suit, it's not about the nature of living forever. It's about, oh, we almost murdered this guy, and how are we gonna get out of it? Like,
well,
how are
not
we
even
gonna
how
get
are we
May
gonna get out
off?
of it? How are we gonna keep Ma from hanging and everybody
Yes,
finding out that she's eternal
right.
because
Not
she's
Right.
just gonna
yeah.
sit there and hang?
Right.
And which was an image that I found
So dark.
really grisly for a kid's book. The hanging somebody who can't die is just
Yeah.
really disturbing. But let's
Terrifying.
rewind a little bit. I mean, the, if I'm looking for why do teachers like this book or why did they like this book? I mean, is it good or bad to live forever? Who gets to live forever? Who gets to decide? I mean, it
Yeah.
was heavy handed, but it was interesting stuff. And then I really loved in the epilogue that she apparently chose not to drink. She apparently made some decision that it was better to be mortal, or she, like, you know, tripped and fell on her way to the fountain or something. But
Or she was 10. I,
yeah,
Or
but
she gave the water to the toad
well, she did. But when she
and
does, she says, I can always go to the fountain. I can always go to the spring and get some more, but she never does.
she never does, as far as we know.
And
Yeah.
that's a decision that I would have liked to have scene on the page.
Yes.
Because I think the average 10-year-old probably doesn't like even get it.
Right.
Right? If
I
you get
think
to
there's
the end, they'd be
probably
like,
a
what? Why?
I
Because
think there's
what
probably like a
10-year-old doesn't want to live forever?
yeah, I think there's probably like a sequel here, like Winnie Everlasting, where we find out that she actually did drink from the fountain and she went on to have fabulous adventures.
She faked her death. I
I
actually
love
thought that
that.
was when they saw the gravestone. I actually thought the epilogue was going to be like she was off traveling somewhere and had, faked her death. But
That would be a much
that was
cooler
not it.
ending.
Yeah, I'd be
Uh,
down for, and I would read those books.
well, I mean, it would kind of be like Addie LaRue, right? I mean, a
Yeah.
little bit. Uh, but yeah, if you're teaching this to 10-year-olds who none of which would think living it forever is bad, I don't think. And I mean, maybe that's the point is you leave these kids being like, why did she do that?
Yeah, I read an interview with her that uh, Michelle, you may have found this one too, where Babbitt talked about how she came up with this story when her daughter, she was reading to her daughter, and her daughter was like scared of death, and she was like, "Oh, death isn't scary," and then like that kind of came around the idea of like, oh, the absence of death is actually scary. Like you need to have like this is a natural thing in life. I thought that was interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
Yes. And maybe in that same interview or another, I don't know, I read several interviews with her. There was also something about her saying that the name Tuck, there's an old definition of it where it means life, and that's why she chose the name Tuck.
Hmm. Yeah,
Anyway.
that was great. I mean, cool. Do your research. That's awesome. Um, yeah, I did struggle, and this is just my own like as my family comes from South Texas, and growing up in like evangelical world, there is an idolization of the simplicity of rural life. And so I was immediately started to get triggered by this book. I was like, no, progress is good. Progress is excellent. We want progress. So I did struggle with that. I was like, I could hear my family members, specifically my uncle, arguing with me that like cities are bad and the forest is wonderful and we should all live off the land. And I would always argue back, like the only people that argue that you should live a blue collar life are those that don't have to. I was like on all the land because I've done blue collar jobs and they're hard and they kind of suck. But so that was like, I don't know. I struggled with that. And then I thought maybe I was imagining it. And then we got to the epilogue and they show up in the 50s and they're like, isn't it horrible that there's all this progress? I'm like, no, it's great. Go to that diner and have a cup of coffee. That coffee is awesome. You're welcome. But yeah, anyway, that was a weird. I don't know that anybody else would experience that, but that was part of my experience of the book was like, I don't know. I think there's a like, if we want to talk about the progress of time, especially in 1975, when like she's writing like the Vietnam War is ending and there's just a lot happening. Like the civil rights movement is, struggling forward. Like there's a lot going on. Part of me is like, let's view progress differently than like this desire to go backward to the 1800s. Like I struggled with that a little bit.
Unless your philosophy is environmental, and then like
That's true. There
And
were
then
more
it's
so
bad.
forests. Yeah.
Right. And then,
uh
Yeah.
so I think there's a view of that kind of book that is not necessarily like
And I didn't catch
the
that.
way you
And again,
describe
it may be I'm the only one that
it.
saw it that way. That may just be my own baggage I'm bringing into the story. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm just yeah. And I know you say nobody teaches in school anymore, but they I feel like they did at least into the 90s or 2000s because people used to order it from me for school,
mhm.
right? Like
I have no
schools used
doubt
to
that this
order
is
copies.
taught in school systems still. I don't
Um,
think it's taught in my
so
my kids,
yeah,
but I'm sure it's taught. Yeah.
and I wonder. There's so many like good contemporary stuff, right? Like I read this. I mean, I love the Penderwicks. Uh, and I wish we had read the Penderwicks instead because if you haven't read it, Jeff, have you read it
I
with any of
haven't
your
read it.
kids?
That's one of the ones my kids didn't get into. Yeah.
I
Voice
haven't
it.
read that either. I need to.
Michelle, you haven't read the Penderwicks?
No.
Okay. Great. So here's something that I can bring to it. Penderwicks feels like it's written in the 60s or 70s, but it's contemporary. It is bucolic. The stakes are low. The personalities and the emotions are high. It's just a fun, fabulous book.
Mm.
And I wish that we had read that instead. A book called Lupe Wong Won't Dance, which is a just came out in the last couple of years, which is about a girl who pitches on the boys' baseball team, and she loves baseball. And her uncle has told her if she gets all A's that he's going to introduce her to her favorite professional baseball player because he has it in. And she is failing gym because she won't square dance.
Nice.
And it's a
That's
brilliant,
fun.
fabulous book that has like cultural sensitivity and investigation.
Mm.
She's like Latino Asian. Her name is Lupe Wong. And it's got gender. I mean, it's just like doing all sorts of things while being fun and fast moving.
That's
And I
fun.
just thought, like, if kids, I just can't imagine having kids enjoying this stuff, but it's just me.
I don't, there's a lot of
I feel
charming
it.
moments. Like I laughed out loud when the sheriff explained that he would have to trail far behind the man in the yellow suit because his horse couldn't run. That was like, I was like, that's really funny. That's a nice, that was a fun moment in this book.
That
Yeah.
was, and I enjoyed, I mean, I've read that Natalie Babbitt loves Alice in Wonderland, and I felt like there was a similar whimsicalness of
They were
like,
definitely with Winnie. Yeah.
yeah, with Winnie
Hmm.
and with the toad. And I mean, sometimes it was a little bit overkill, but I don't know. I the first couple of chapters I was really hooked on the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I will say my complaints for the book are the complaints an adult would bring to the book, not complaints that a kid that I think one of my like if I read this with my 10-year-old, he wouldn't have any problem with the, you know, dichotomy between rural and urban life. He would that
Right.
would
Right.
be like he'd be like, yeah, give it to the toad. The toad's awesome. Like that would be his
Let the toad live forever.
yeah, that would be his thing of like, yeah, that's great. Give it to the frog. That's a good choice. Yeah. Any
Yeah.
characters we'd want to go to dinner with from this book?
I liked Winnie. Winnie was I don't know. I think Winnie was my favorite.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I, I liked Angus Tuck because he seemed to be the only one who was sort of like tuned into what the issues were. and
Very practical.
it was very practical, and he was, calm and when calm was called for. Uh yeah, just circle around what you were saying, Michelle, about I liked about Alice in Wonderland is that, I did like Winnie and I liked her attitude, but like it just seemed like a lost opportunity. She gets there and the exciting, crazy thing is that they eat pancakes in the dining room. I mean, in the living room, right? Like
Right.
it could have been like, I don't know, like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, or you know what I mean? It
Right.
could have been like something fantastical. Um,
And then she has him put the one of the brothers put the fish back after they catch the fish. That was like a big moral dilemma. Like there could have been more plot in
yeah.
that.
What did you think
Uh,
of them not talking while they ate?
I thought that was hilarious because if
yeah.
you think about it, if you go out to dinner and you see like people who have been married a really long time,
That's
sometimes like, they
true.
just sit there and they eat and they don't really talk.
That's true.
Like
They
those
just
people have
eat.
been together a long time.
Yep. That's super true. I hadn't thought of it that way. It just struck me as odd. I was like, it makes perfect sense, but I can't figure out why. But that nails it. Yeah.
But then also, if you think about it, they're reuniting with their sons after not seeing their sons for 10 years. So you would think that they would like catch them up on all the stuff they've done for the
Yeah,
past.
where'd you been? Where have you gone? Where have you? But I have a feeling that Jesse was like, I went up the road about 2 miles. I,
I know.
I found a nice lake up there. I've been fishing for 10 years. Yeah.
Michelle, were there any questions that we should have asked you that we didn't?
Mm, no, not really. I mean, I think no, no.
All right. Good. And we should have prepped you for this, but we didn't. But I assured Jeff that will have things easily at hand. not kids books, but just like book recommendations. What are you reading? What's awesome?
Oh my gosh. So right now I'm reading an early bound manuscript of a book I'm writing a blurb for that's coming out next year from Pantheon, and it's called Submersed, and it's by Matthew Gavin Frank. He wrote a really cool book several years ago about a giant squid, a nonfiction book. He's a nonfiction writer. An excerpt from this book that I'm currently reading, it was published as the cover story of Harper's Magazine a few months ago, and
Wow.
it's all about people who are amateur. They create amateur submersibles, like and are obsessed with like creating their own submarines. So it's all about that community, but and within that, it's also about the murder of Kim Wall, a journalist who was murdered by one of these creators of an amateur submarine.
Wow.
So anyway, Matthew Gavin Frank is an unbelievably talented writer. In reading this, like I haven't been this excited about a narrative nonfiction book since Tom, you might remember when we read Shadow Divers for a book group
Yes.
at River
Yep.
Run by Robert Kurson years ago. And I feel like this is going to be similar, where this is a book I'm going to be telling everyone they have to read. It's just fascinating, and also the prose is incredible. It's getting me so excited about reading a bunch of narrative nonfiction again, because I've been very heavily reading mostly fiction lately. So it's been a nice break. But so that's one of the things. I oh gosh, this is like I'm just blanking on all the amazing books I've read lately. Liars by Sarah Manguso. Everyone's been talking about that. I don't know what's wrong with me that I read a bunch of divorce books right before getting married, but it's like the summer of divorce books. There are a lot of good divorce books that came out. And so in actually not just this summer, like in the past year, I feel like the pandemic has a lot of people have been writing about this.
Processing
Is
some
it like wish
feelings.
fulfillment? It's like
Yeah.
I'm trapped in an apartment
Yeah, people
with
are
my
either like they're
spouse.
Uh,
either closer than ever or like
Yeah.
no, their relationships were doomed. And so Liars by Sarah Manguso, I think, is the best out of all of the novels that have approached that topic. And I've read her, she's mostly been a nonfiction writer, but she wrote another novel called Very Cold People that I reviewed for the Washington Post and really enjoyed. But this is her second novel, and I think it's her best book yet. It's phenomenal. Really dealing with like what it means to be an artist and a mother within the confines of a marriage where there's not enough of a support system. And so that book, I feel like that is one of the best books of the year.
Nice.
Uh, and I have to like look at my list. This is so bad. I have like brain fog these days where if I don't look at what I keep a list for this reason for when people ask me
I
because
While Michelle's looking something up, I'm going to tell you one of my favorite Michelle stories,
yeah.
which is that I would consistently, when Michelle worked at the bookstore, give her a hard time because she would ecstatically push the book that she was reading on somebody. And then, like 2 weeks later, I'd go to recommend that book. She'd be like, actually, I got to the end and I hated it. I'm like, Michelle, I cannot tell you how many times that happened. Like so many times. I'd be like, you can't be enthusiastic until you finish the book.
Right,
What
right.
if you would do that with Tuck Everlasting? I bet you'd be like, I'm only on chapter 3, but it is amazing.
Right, right. And then I'd get
Right.
to the end and be like, hell no. But in looking at my list though, I have found, okay, one of my favorite books of the year. I don't know if you guys have read this yet, but Beautyland by Marie Helene Bertino.
It's on my list. I
Um,
haven't read it yet.
it's so good. So I'm a little biased because Marie was my thesis advisor at NYU, where I got my
Wow.
MFA in fiction. But even if she wasn't, this is by far her best book yet. It's a novel about a girl named Adina who is may or may not be an alien. I take it to believe that she is actually an alien, and she's faxing missives back to her home planet, observations on humanity. And it is absolutely brilliant, hilarious, poignant. It's really one of the most original novels I've read in a long time. I can't get enough of that book.
That sounds
That's
great.
awesome.
Yeah,
I love it.
yeah.
Thanks for those. Those were great.
Of course. Oh, I have one more. Sorry.
No,
Yeah,
let's
go.
go for it.
And this is also a book this is a book I blurbed. Rosie Schaap, who used to be the drinks columnist for New York Times and wrote an amazing memoir called Drinking with Men. Rosie's new memoir is called uh, The Slow Road North. And it's all about her losing her husband and her mother. So dealing with grief, like right, losing them around the same time and deciding to leave Brooklyn where she lived for many, many years and move to Northern Ireland. So it's a book that is very richly um you know, it's very much set in the landscape is what matters so much in there in her
Mm,
healing process and in acclimating to her new life there. And it's just so beautiful. I love it. I really love it. I
that's
think it's
great.
one of those quiet books that deserves to get so much more attention than it is.
Nice. That's awesome.
Mhm.
All right,
I'd
well,
love to hear what
thanks.
you guys are reading.
Well, I've been doing so much editing this summer, which is good because it's good business that there's not a lot of time left for fiction. So doing this podcast has been awesome. So I'm reading a bunch of stuff, some of which I like. But for new fiction, God of the Woods was fabulous.
Oh, I just finished that
Because
book.
I
Yeah.
loved Long Bright River.
Hmm.
And this is Liz Moore is the author, and it's less intense than Long Bright River, but it's richer, I think, in some ways. And it's a thriller, but it's not gruesome. It's a book of secrets, really. It's about it's the slow unfolding of the past and a ton of different characters. But there's something about the way she writes prose, and I can only think of a handful of people that she reminds me of. One is like Jeanette Winterson, where it feels like she has put her hand on the small of your back and is just pushing you through the book.
Mm.
Like as soon as I started reading that book, I just felt like I was being shoved forward for 350 pages. It was fabulous. She's great. So, did you like it,
Nice.
Yeah, and
Michelle?
talk about a book again that like you uses setting in such an amazing way. Like I really felt like I was in that camp
Yeah,
with characters. So good.
Nice.
Jeff.
I am I didn't have a great English education growing up in inner city New Orleans. So I am backfilling my education currently, and I am reading the I have a compendium of Langston Hughes poetry that I'm working through, about halfway through
Mm.
of all of Langston Hughes's poetry. So that's what I've been doing this month. So hopefully I'll finish that soon. But that's what I read. Besides the books for this, I'm also
Yeah.
fighting through the Wizardiverse Sea, which is the other book on our list that I've been putting off forever, and now I actually have to read because we're going to talk about it soon with with JP. So I gotta get it run. But yeah, but so I don't have anything fun that I'm reading. I'm reading uh powerful but somewhat sad poetry. That's fine. That's my current
Nothing
jam.
wrong with that.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's my current jam.
all right. Well, if listeners, if there are any listeners, things my mother and I don't talk about.
Hey,
Did I say it
listeners,
right?
what are you talking
Things that
about,
I,
What my mother and
what
I
my mother and I don't talk about.
don't.
It's bright pink. You can't miss it. Um, what color is the new one going to be?
I believe it's going to be yellow. I'm waiting for that to be finalized, but
Nice.
Nice.
You'd think they'd go for like some like stereotypical like blue for
right, I
It'll
didn't
yeah.
want that.
No,
it
Yeah.
that's
aligns
great.
well with this book. That's
Um, I was describing it to Jeff as not a chicken soup book that you might. It's like
Yes.
it's
Definitely.
real and an amazing and amazingly diverse group of contributors. And imagine the new one is also. So
Yeah.
people should pick up that. And what else should they do if they want to get in touch with you or read some of your stuff?
They can go to my website, which is just michelefilgate.com, and my
One
contact
L.
is on, yes, 1L.
Well, one in Michelle and one in Filgate.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
All right.
And
Well,
oh, sorry, go
no,
ahead.
no, please go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't
I
mean
was
to cut you
just
off.
going to say my contact info is on the website. So
Perfect. I'm gonna hit stop and we can chat a little bit more.